The most iconic symbol of America's freedom is the Stars and Stripes, often called Old Glory, our nation's flag. Throughout our history, several monuments and symbols have stood as witnesses to our freedom as a nation. Among the most recognized of these is the Liberty Bell, on display in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the birthplace of our independence and home to many monuments of American freedom. The Liberty Bell is one of the most recognizable objects in American history. It is not large by the standards of monuments. It is not a towering statue, a battlefield, or a government building. It is a bell, damaged, silent, and permanently cracked. And yet millions of people have stood in line to see it. That raises a question: why does this bell matter? The answer is not merely that it is old. Many objects from colonial America are old. It is not simply that it once hung in what we now call Independence Hall. Many objects were present in Philadelphia during the founding period. The Liberty Bell matters because over time it came to represent one of the most powerful and most difficult words in human history: liberty. But its story is more complicated than the patriotic images many of us grew up with. The bell was not originally called the Liberty Bell. It was first known as the State House Bell because it hung in the tower of the Pennsylvania State House, the building we now know as Independence Hall. Its first purpose was practical. It rang to call lawmakers to meetings and to gather townspeople for public announcements. That transformation is what makes the bell worth studying. The Liberty Bell tells us something about the American experiment. It tells us that liberty can be proclaimed before it is fully practiced. It tells us that symbols can take on meanings beyond what their makers originally intended. And it tells us that a cracked bell can sometimes speak more powerfully in silence than it ever did when it rang. To understand the Liberty Bell, we need to begin before the American Revolution. In the early 1750s, Philadelphia was one of the most important cities in British North America. It was growing in population, commerce, and political importance. At the center of civic life stood the Pennsylvania State House. This building would later become famous as Independence Hall, but at the time it was the seat of Pennsylvania's colonial government. As Philadelphia grew, the city needed a larger and more suitable bell for the State House Tower. Bells in the 18th century were not decorative objects. They were tools of public communication. Before telephones, radios, television, text alerts, or social media, a public bell could summon a city. It could call legislators to session. It could announce important news. It could mark danger, celebration, mourning, or civic ceremony. In 1751, Isaac Norris, the Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly, ordered a bell from the Whitechapel Foundry in London. Whitechapel was a major English bell foundry, and ordering from London made sense for a British colony. This was not yet a nation ordering a national symbol. This was a colonial assembly ordering a functional bell for a public building. But the bell was ordered with an unusual inscription. Around the bell were to be words from Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 10. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Those words would eventually become the most important thing about the bell. At the time, however, the bell was not yet a revolutionary icon. It was not called the Liberty Bell. It was not made to announce American independence. It was created for the Pennsylvania State House, and its original purpose was to serve the everyday rhythms of public life in colonial Philadelphia. That is one reason the Liberty Bell's later story is so striking. It did not begin as a national monument. It became one. The bell that Isaac Norris ordered did not have an easy beginning. The original bell was cast in London and shipped across the Atlantic to Philadelphia. When it arrived, it weighed about 2,000 pounds. It was intended to hang in the State House Tower and serve as the public voice of Pennsylvania's colonial government. But almost immediately, there was a problem. The bell cracked on its first test ring. That first bell, the English-made bell, failed before it ever entered regular service. This moment is historically interesting because later Americans found symbolism in it. A bell made in England cracked in America, and then local craftsmen had to remake it. That sounds almost too perfect as a metaphor. The old world's instrument breaking in the new world and being recast by American hands. The damaged bell was given to two Philadelphia metalworkers, John Pass and John Stowe. They were not famous national figures. They were local craftsmen. Their names, however, are now permanently attached to the bell because when they recast it, they added their names to the inscription. Pass and Stowe melted down the cracked bell and cast a new one in Philadelphia. But the first recast was apparently unsatisfactory. The tone was not pleasing. The bell was melted down and recast again. After this second recasting, the bell was finally hung in 1753. This means the Liberty Bell was not simply cast once. Its early history involved failure, repair, and recasting. That fact gives the bell an interesting, layered identity. It began in London. It broke in Philadelphia. It was remade by local craftsmen. It was judged unsatisfactory. It was remade again, and only then did it become the bell we know. The inscription also changed during this process. The original instructions placed the government authorization first and the biblical quotation below it. But after the recasting, the biblical quotation was placed at the top, with the assembly information below. The wording was also adjusted. Pass and Stowe added their names in the year 1753 in Roman numerals. That change matters visually and symbolically. When you look at the bell today, the first line that encircles it is not the name of the assembly. It is not the name of Pennsylvania. It is the biblical proclamation. The bell's identity would later be defined less by who ordered it and more by what it proclaimed. Once hung, the bell became part of Philadelphia's civic life. It rang to call lawmakers to the assembly. It called citizens together to hear public news. Benjamin Franklin even referred to the bell in a 1755 letter, writing, "Adieu, the bell rings, and I must go among the grave ones and talk politics." That short line from Franklin gives us a glimpse of the bell before it became a legend. It was not yet a sacred relic. It was part of the ordinary machinery of public government. It rang, and men went to talk politics. But the ordinary use of the bell is exactly what makes its later transformation so compelling. Liberty was first proclaimed on a civic object, in a civic space, for a colonial government still under the British Crown. The bell was doing practical work long before it became a national symbol, and from the beginning, it carried an inscription that would outgrow its original setting. The most important words on the Liberty Bell come from Leviticus 25:10. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. In the biblical context, this verse refers to the year of Jubilee. In ancient Israel, the 50th year was to be marked by a proclamation of release. Debts, land, servitude, family inheritance, and economic restoration are part of the larger Jubilee context. It was a reminder that the land ultimately belonged to the Lord, and that God's people were not to build a society where bondage and loss became permanent across generations. That biblical background helps explain why the verse may have been chosen. The bell was ordered in 1751, roughly 50 years after William Penn's 1701 Charter of Privileges. That charter granted significant religious liberties and political self-government to the people of Pennsylvania. The connection between Penn's charter, the 50th year, and the language of Leviticus 25 is not always stated explicitly in the original records, but it is a meaningful and interesting historical tie-in. Pennsylvania was not ancient Israel, and America did not inherit Israel's covenant promises. But colonial Pennsylvanians did draw from biblical language to describe political and religious liberty. The 50th year connection was likely meaningful. A bell ordered around the 50th anniversary of Penn's charter carried a verse about liberty proclaimed in the 50th year. At first, that inscription did not make the bell famous, but later generations would notice it, and once they did, the bell's meaning changed. The Liberty Bell is inseparably linked in public memory with the American Revolution. But here again, we need to distinguish between documented history and later legend. The popular image is simple. The bell is tied to the Declaration of Independence and the public announcement of American liberty in Philadelphia. The Declaration was approved by Congress on July 4, 1776, inside the Pennsylvania State House. 4 days later, on July 8, the Declaration was publicly read in the State House yard by Colonel John Nixon. The citizens of Philadelphia were summoned by the bells of the city, and after reading the Declaration, the city's bells rang in celebration. Whether the State House bell itself rang on that exact day is not certain, but the bell's connection to independence does not depend on proving that it rang at a precise moment. Its connection is that it hung in the building where independence was debated, declared, and later remembered. It belonged to the civic and political world of revolutionary Philadelphia. And then, in 1777, the bell's story took a dramatic turn. The British Army was moving toward Philadelphia. After the Battle of Brandywine, the city was vulnerable. If the British captured Philadelphia's bells, they could melt them down and use the metal for cannon or gunshot. So the State House bell and other bells were removed from the city for safekeeping. The bell that would later become America's symbol of liberty had to be hidden from an invading British army. The bell was taken to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and hidden beneath the floor of Zion Reformed Church. It remained hidden there for nearly a year. In the summer of 1778, after the British withdrew from Philadelphia, it was safe to return the bells to the city. A bell made to call people publicly had to be silenced and hidden. A bell inscribed with "Proclaim Liberty" was buried beneath church floorboards while war raged around Philadelphia. There is something striking about that contrast. The bell did not secure liberty by itself. It was not magic. It was not a weapon. It could be captured, melted, or destroyed. It had to be protected by ordinary people making risky decisions in dangerous circumstances. When the bell returned to Philadelphia in 1778, it resumed its place in the State House. But over time, the building and the bell both took on new meanings. The State House became Independence Hall. The old State House bell became associated with the founding generation. And eventually, the bell became a relic of the Revolution. But even after the Revolution, the bell was not immediately the national icon we know today. In fact, for a time, it faded somewhat into the background. Its greatest symbolic power would come not from the Revolution itself, but from a later moral struggle over the meaning of liberty. The Liberty Bell's most important symbolic transformation came in the 19th century. By then, the United States had declared independence and formed a constitutional republic. But slavery remained. The nation had proclaimed liberty, but millions of enslaved people were excluded from that liberty. This is where the bell's inscription became impossible to ignore. The words did not say, "Proclaim liberty to some." They did not say, "Proclaim liberty to those already recognized by law." They said, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Abolitionists saw the moral force of those words. They recognized the contradiction between America's language of liberty and the reality of human bondage. In the 19th century, abolitionists began using the bell's inscription as a rallying cry against slavery. The State House bell increasingly became known as the Liberty Bell through this anti-slavery context. The name Liberty Bell was popularized not mainly by the founding generation, but by abolitionists. That gives the bell a sharper moral history. The bell became a witness against national hypocrisy. It stood as a reminder that a country could celebrate liberty in principle while denying liberty in practice. The inscription became a kind of accusation. If liberty is to be proclaimed throughout all the land, then it must reach all the inhabitants. This does not mean the Liberty Bell solves slavery. Symbols do not repent. People must. Symbols do not pass laws. Governments do. Symbols do not free the oppressed. Moral conviction, courage, sacrifice, and action are required. But symbols can clarify the issue. The Liberty Bell helped abolitionists frame slavery as a direct contradiction of America's professed ideals. It allowed them to say, in effect, "You already have the words. They are written on one of your own historic objects. Now live up to them." That part of the bell's history is sobering. It means the bell is not only a patriotic symbol, it is also a reforming symbol. It does not merely celebrate liberty achieved, it exposes liberty denied. Scripture's language of liberty cannot be reduced to national slogans. Biblical liberty is finally rooted in God's authority, human dignity, moral truth, and deliverance from bondage. When a society borrows that language, it also invites moral accountability. The abolitionists understood that. They saw the bell's inscription not as decoration, but as a demand. The abolitionist movement was not the last reform movement to borrow the voice of the Liberty Bell. In the early 20th century, women's suffrage advocates created what became known as the Justice Bell, or the Women's Liberty Bell. Cast in 1915, it was modeled after the Liberty Bell, but with an added phrase from the Constitution's preamble, "Establish justice." Its clapper was chained so that it could not ring, symbolizing the political silence of women who were denied the vote. The Justice Bell traveled across Pennsylvania in support of women's suffrage, carrying the argument that liberty was incomplete while women remained without political representation. After the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, the bell's clapper was unchained, and the bell was rung for the first time. This adds another layer to the Liberty Bell story. Abolitionists had used its inscription to challenge slavery. Suffragists used its image to challenge the exclusion of women from the vote. In both cases, the bell became more than a patriotic relic. It became a question pressed upon the conscience of the nation. If liberty is proclaimed throughout all the land, who is still being left outside its sound? Today, the most recognizable feature of the Liberty Bell is its crack. But even here, the common story is often less precise than the real one. The bell cracked once very early on its first test ring, before being melted down and recast a third time by Pass and Stowe in Philadelphia. But the famous crack we see today is a later development. No one recorded exactly when or why the Liberty Bell first developed that later crack. The most likely explanation is that a narrow split developed in the early 1840s after decades of use. In 1846, workers tried to repair it before George Washington's birthday by widening the crack, using a technique meant to stop it from spreading and restore the tone. The repair failed, and another fissure developed, silencing the bell permanently. That means the large visible crack is not exactly the original damage. It is partly the repair. The familiar wound in the bell is in part evidence of men attempting to repair the breach in the bell. After the bell could no longer serve as a working bell, it became more valuable as a symbol. Once the bell was mute and no longer useful as a summoner or alarm, it began to take on a new and more powerful role as a symbol of human liberty. Beginning in 1885 and continuing periodically until 1915, the Liberty Bell traveled across the country by rail. It was displayed at expositions, world's fairs, and commemorative events. These journeys gave millions of Americans the opportunity to see the bell. This period helped turn the bell into a national icon. Americans who would never travel to Philadelphia could see it in person. Crowds gathered, photographs were taken. The bell became part of shared national memory. After its final return to Philadelphia in 1915, it stayed there. Eventually, concerns about preservation and crowds led to new display locations, including the Liberty Bell Pavilion during the Bicentennial era and later the Liberty Bell Center. But the symbol continued to spread. In 1950, as part of the United States Savings Bonds Independence Drive, official reproductions of the Liberty Bell were cast in France and presented across the country. 53 bells were cast and presented to the 48 states, the territories, and the District of Columbia.
Liberty Bells arrive in New York to help sell independent savings bonds. They're the first of 52 full-scale copies of America's famous Liberty Bell to arrive from France, the gift of 6 U.S. companies. They sail past the Statue of Liberty, one for each state, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Alaska.
These bells served as symbols of the Savings Bonds campaign from May 15 to July 4, 1950. One of those replicas was given to the people of Washington State. Here in Tacoma, it sits in a lush outdoor plaza on the backside of the beautiful 1911 Union Station, which now hosts the U.S. District Courthouse. This Liberty Bell reproduction still carries the same basic message as the original. The informational plaque begins with the words, "Dedicated to you, a free citizen in a free land." That language is worth noticing. The original Liberty Bell had moved from being a practical state house bell to being a national symbol. But the replicas brought that symbol closer to ordinary citizens. A person did not have to travel to Philadelphia to stand before the image of the bell. The symbol was placed in state capitals, public spaces, and local communities. The Tacoma plaque says that in standing before the symbol, citizens had the opportunity to dedicate themselves to the principles of individual freedom. That is mid-20th century patriotic language, and it reflects the concerns of its own time. The year was 1950. The United States was entering the Cold War. The federal government was encouraging citizens to buy savings bonds. The Liberty Bell was being used again, not merely as a relic of the past, but as a call to public responsibility to ensure our liberty. That is part of what makes the bell's story so layered. In the 1750s, it called a colonial assembly. In the Revolutionary era, it stood in the building where independence was debated and declared. In the 1800s, abolitionists used its inscription to confront the evil of slavery. In the early 1900s, suffragists echoed its message through the Justice Bell. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, it traveled as a national relic. And in 1950, its replicas spread across the country as reminders of civic duty and national liberty. The bell became more than an object to look at. It became an object that asked something of the viewer. So what should we learn from the Liberty Bell? First, we should learn that liberty must be rightly understood. The words on the bell come from Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10. "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." In its biblical context, that verse belongs to the year of Jubilee. It was not a slogan for unlimited personal autonomy. It was a proclamation made under the authority of God, connected to release, restoration, and the ordering of life according to the Lord's ownership and justice. For Christians, the deepest liberty is not merely political liberty, as valuable as political liberty is. The deepest liberty is freedom before God through Jesus Christ. Jesus said, "If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed." John chapter 8, verse 36. That is liberty no earthly government can create, and no earthly government can finally take away. And civil liberty still matters to us, and most assuredly religious liberty matters to an even greater measure. William Penn's Charter of Privileges mattered because it protected freedom of conscience and forms of self-government that were not guaranteed in much of the world. Political liberty matters. The Declaration of Independence mattered because it argued that government is accountable to truths higher than the will of rulers. Personal and civil liberty matter. The abolitionists understood that a nation could not honestly proclaim liberty while millions remained enslaved. Second, the Liberty Bell teaches us that symbols carry responsibility. The bell did not always mean the same thing to every generation. To colonial Pennsylvania, it was a state house bell. To later Americans, it became tied to independence. To abolitionists, it became a witness against slavery. To citizens in the 20th century, including those who saw the replicas sent across the country in 1950, it became a call to preserve freedom in their own time. That is why the Tacoma plaque is such a useful closing image. It does not merely say, "Here is a replica of an old bell." It addresses the viewer directly. Dedicated to you, a free citizen in a free land. This is a freedom monument meant to inspire. That turns the symbol outward. It asks the person standing before it to consider not only what previous generations did with liberty, but what we are doing with it now. How do we promote liberty, unity, and harmony as a people of this great nation? Third, the crack teaches us that liberty is fragile. The Liberty Bell proclaims liberty, but it is cracked. That is not a weakness in the symbol. It may be the very thing that makes the symbol so honest. Liberty in this world is fragile. Religious liberty can be neglected. Political liberty can be abused. Civil liberty can be denied to people made in the image of God. Personal liberty can be distorted into selfishness if it is separated from truth, virtue, and responsibility. A free people must preserve liberty with humility, vigilance, justice, and moral seriousness. A people committed to living responsibly. The Liberty Bell no longer rings, but in its silence, it still speaks. It reminds us that liberty must be proclaimed. It reminds us that liberty must be protected. It reminds us that liberty must be extended justly. And for Christians, it reminds us that every earthly liberty is accountable to the God who gives freedom its truest meaning. The bell is cracked, a flaw in the cast, but the proclamation remains undaunted by time, by trials, and testing. We hear the call to all citizens on this 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof.